Where's my Dragonator?
Calm down, sir. It's still on the inside of your ridiculous warship.
Oh, thank God, Matthews.
Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, Monster Hunter Wilds is coming up incredibly soon. Like, unbelievably so at this point. I am hyped beyond belief, but I'm also the person on this channel who has stayed as blind and spoiler-free as possible to this game. And as such, my hype has been repurposed a lot to thinking about other Monster Hunter games and games within the hunting genre. I've talked about a few of these over the last few days, but the one with the most impact on me personally was Monster Hunter World and its Iceborne expansion, of course. And with Wilds being the start of the 6th generation of Monster Hunter games, it means that the 5th generation is officially concluding. And while there were arguments that Rise and World weren't very mutually exclusive experiences, given the differences between them on release platform at the very least, if not the wildly different gameplay, it is undeniable, even from the little bits of Wilds that I have seen myself, the release trailer and the character creator, that this game intends to carry on the gameplay style of World at least a little bit more so than it does Rise and Sunbreak, and so it is trying to essentially directly replace it. So today, let's have a look back on Monster Hunter World and Iceborne and say goodbye to these games, at least for now. Back when Monster Hunter World released, I had never touched a Monster Hunter game in my life. I already was, of course, close friends with Josh at the time, and especially in the lead up to the game, he kept talking about it, saying how it was going to be an absolute masterpiece, and for the most part, he was talking to me and a few of our other friends who had never played Monster Hunter games before. There was a point where I decided that I would give it a go. I was the only one of us that said I would, specifically during the beta, as this was my real opportunity to learn the game before buying it. I played it with Josh, we had a great time, and then when it came time for the playthrough itself of the game, which he would originally have done solo, for whatever reason, he asked me if I wanted to join him and have a go at it together. And so that's how I found and got into Monster Hunter World. From my first great Jagras, which I thought was just a little bit silly, to Anjanath getting a bit more proper dinosaur-like, which I absolutely adored, then progressing to things like Tobi Kadachi, which are a great example of the creativity the Monster Hunter team are capable of, while sticking to nearly believable creatures as well. I experienced Radabon before I ever knew what Uragaan was, which absolutely colored my opinion on those two monsters long term, with me thinking that Radabon is better than a lot of people do, and Uragaan worse. As much as I understand, of course, the order they were added to the series originally, in my own head, in my own journey, my experience, Radabon was first, and honestly, I think that's a really neat part of being a new hunter. Every new hunter has their own journey, their own order, they hit their own difficulty walls, and then they overcome them in their own ways. The story through Monster Hunter World was fun and a little bit silly. I found it really charming that the characters had like titles instead of actual names as well, and then a lot of the cutscenes were just genuinely really funny to me too. Then we have the absolute spectacle of Zora Magdaros, which was far too cool at the time for me to think about being a proper monster fight. And the thing to remember about Zora Magdaros is that while now, in hindsight, years later, most people think of it as a pretty boring fight compared to most monsters or even other siege fights really, but you have to remember that it's not all about your 100th fight. That's not how they make the game necessarily for every monster. Some of them are about your first experience more than anything else, and Zora Magdaros was a really, really cool first time hunt, especially as a new hunter from that perspective. Then we progressed up the ranks, the first Rathalos, Diablos, Odogaron, then Basilgeuse started coming into the game. It was awesome, and I just love how all of them sort of lean into being a little bit silly, even the ones that are trying to be extremely cool. Then we got up into the Elder Dragons, learning just how imposing and crazy powerful creatures could get in the Monster Hunter series, capped off, of course, with Xeno'jiiva for the base game, who absolutely blew my mind visually. And as someone who picked up dual blades as my first weapon that I fell in love with, I had a great time Beyblading the hell out of this guy too. Not to mention moving on then after that, when Iceborne eventually came out, to this expansion, which had incredible monsters like Bonbaro, who had no business being an invader, Coral Pookie Pookie, who is, in my opinion, the best subspecies in the entire series, or even up to new Elder Dragons like Namiel, who is still one of my favorite monsters of all time. The monster creativity and the general design of their fights was top-notch the whole way through World and Iceborne. Overall though, that first run through the game is one of the best story experiences I've had in gaming, and I don't mean specifically the story itself was like exquisitely written or whatever. It was because the gameplay was top-notch, just pure fun to actually play, but that combined with just the incredible designs of the monsters left you endlessly wanting to experience the next creature in line, just to see what ridiculous thing they would come up with next, and how they would execute it as well. Not to mention getting getting to go through that journey with Josh, who had an extremely deep knowledge of the series and lore and such, even from the get-go, and it made for a super unique experience as a result, even if I did have to rejoin quests a lot because I couldn't watch cutscenes at the same time as my friend. Then when we finished, I started by just starting to hunt for fun, really. Josh helped me work out a build to aim for, and I wasn't quite too into it yet because the whole deco farming thing didn't really make sense in my head yet. But then we talked about Dragon Piercer Bow as a concept, and this was the thing that ended up getting me absolutely hooked on the long-term gameplay loop of Monster Hunter's endgame, past just being someone who enjoyed the hell out of the story itself. Why? I don't really know. I can't put it into words properly, but something about Dragon Piercer unleashed this like primal satisfaction every time that it connected with the long side of a monster, going the whole way through, making that incredible sound while it threads through a monster's skin and flesh and bones, and especially when it resulted in a flinch or a knockdown as a result, it was amazing. All of my original weapon build that I made upon first hitting endgame, the idea was just sort of pure damage so I could farm better, and yeah, damage is great, but the thing with Dragon Piercer and making a build around it is the more that you build up the damage and utility of the skill, it not only gains a lot of comfort in its playstyle, it becomes much more usable, but you also got way more of those super satisfying moments because you're aiming to hit hard and do real damage with it too, which of course made more of those flinches and knockdowns happen. And it was while learning how to play this way and making this build that I got really into just hunting monsters for the sake of hunting monsters, for the enjoyment of it all, properly learning their movesets because of the satisfaction of being able to predict them so I could find openings to use a Dragon Piercer as one of the longest charging attacks in the game, as opposed to my earlier gameplay, of course, where I just sort of wildly flail whatever weapon I was holding at a monster until I got hit, then heal, get back in, and repeat that loop. It shifted my mindset entirely, and that's when it all started to click for me, really. As a game as a whole, Monster Hunter World was the biggest technological leap between entries in the series so far. It moved us from sectioned off maps with loading screens between each zone to full, massive open maps with tons of verticality, hidden areas, lots of small monsters around the map, all these monsters living together, existing near each other at the same time, even turf wars, which is a crazy addition to the series, and importantly, there weren't any loading screens during a hunt anymore. The changes to prior games from this to World is massive, and there were definitely a number of veteran hunters who actually didn't like that and preferred the old style. They thought it was too much change. This doesn't come up a whole lot these days, really, because the more recent and relevant drama is Iceborne versus Sunbreak. But back when World was the active current game, the discourse was about how Monster Hunter World was worse than the older games, how things like accessing your item box while hunting had ruined the series entirely in the way that they balanced hunts, things like that. As World was my first Monster Hunter game, I do find it hard to comment on that without bias, of course, but to put my perspective simply, World brought in the most new players this series has ever had, and a large part of that is because of the major changes that were made to the game to make it happen. The visuals of the game, the openness and immersiveness of the maps is crazy, and that is what got so many new eyes on Monster Hunter World. The weapons and the movesets in base World were all incredible, of course, and while dual blades was the weapon I started with, I soon moved on to hammer for a bit before maining bow for a while. I played longsword as a main weapon for multiple months, and then I rounded back to hammer a second time, and that second time was when I truly fell in love with the hammer and it became my main weapon for the entire rest of World and Iceborne, essentially, for a very long time. That said, I found real joy in the variety of Monster Hunter combat more than anything else. I had builds for every weapon before Iceborne came out, and I enjoyed playing all 14 of them in varying amounts. I firmly stand by the statement that there is no such thing as a bad Monster Hunter weapon, and even across the different games, the weapons are always fun. They just lean towards different skills like monster knowledge or fast reflexes, good positioning, things like that, in varying amounts. That said, Monster Hunter World, especially base Monster Hunter World before Iceborne, a lot of people hold to be the gold standard of Monster Hunter weapon movesets. They were relatively simple for the most part, but every weapon had a very unique playstyle that set it apart from the others, and every one of them was also very satisfying in themselves. Then Iceborne came in and added some more cool moves to the various weapons, of course, but we also now have to talk about the elephant in the room, which is Clutch Claw. Clutch Claw is the most polarizing feature that Iceborne added to the game. Its existence added things like a really fun counterattack for Lance, or Thousand Dragons for bow. You could do fun stuff with it with gun lance too, and of course Hammer, my love got its spin combo attack that you could do after a charge attack instead of having to slide down hills to do that, which is just a ton of fun to play with as well. But then you had the negative side of Clutch Claw. If you are attacking a monster part that isn't tenderized, you're just wasting damage. So at that point you basically need to start jumping on the monster and hitting it once or twice to tenderize the part permanently. But that's not it either, because there was also the ability to shoot slinger ammo while clawed to a monster's head and bash them into a wall for a free early knockdown. But this also did a massive chunk of damage, and again, you were just being an inefficient hunter if you didn't do this anytime it was available. Doing this, however, enraged the monster, and you could do it anytime the monster wasn't enraged, so what this ended up doing was making hunts where the monster was just enraged the entire time if hunters were playing effectively. And while that may not seem too bad on the surface, it removes a lot of the nuance of hunts. In most Monster Hunter games, there is a sort of cycle to it. Standard monster existence, enraged monster with some slight speed ups and more damage from its standard version, and then fatigued monster where they get really tired, they're slow, sometimes they drool, instead of attacking they take breaks, maybe they go looking for something to snack on, that type of thing. In Iceborne though, it got to a point very quickly where it was mostly only either enraged or fatigued, no middle state really, and that was very odd honestly, but not at all a deal breaker in a game that was so enjoyable otherwise. So basically on the whole, Clutch Claw was very hit and miss. There were some fun parts of the game that wouldn't have been there without Clutch Claw, but also some pretty major pain points or flaws as well. On the whole though, I think Clutch Claw was fun to me, and I think especially with Wilds around the corner, people might start to appreciate Clutch Claw a little bit more. As with World no longer being a current generation Monster Hunter game, it will always be remembered and enjoyed for what made it stand out from the others, what made it the most different. And hey, one day people might start to feel like they miss Clutch Claw for what it was. But that's the thing. Just like when I was talking about Rise and Sunbreak the other day, it's not necessarily right to say that I'll be missing World and Iceborne, because they will always exist. They're not going anywhere, they're not dying, they're not gone. I have done at least 5 different playthroughs of World and Iceborne over the years since its release, if not more, and I'm sure I will do more in the future too. Monster Hunter games do not die. World will always exist, and even if you take an elongated break from playing it, you can always go back and play it again whenever you feel like it. And even if you aren't a fan of the Clutch Claw, you still get all of the incredible monsters and gameplay to enjoy along the way. And while I don't want to remind people of their past trauma, hey, I know there's still a bunch of people who have long-term goals to finally defeat Fatalis for the first time that haven't managed it in the past, so let's just say that your time isn't over for that. You don't give up unless you never try it again. You haven't failed, you just haven't beat it yet. Thank you Monster Hunter World for introducing me to this lovely series, and thank you to Iceborne for cementing my love for it. Thank you Capcom for the games, and of course thank you to all of you watching for being here for my journey. Whether you saw the Pro and Noob series from the very beginning, the absolute start, or if this is for some reason the first video you've even seen from me, and I absolutely cannot wait to begin a whole new Monster Hunter journey with you all in a few days with the release of Wilds. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.